We got the rock and roll shirt on, we're ready to go. Greetings and salutations, friends. My name is Ariana, and before I start this video, I do want to give a quick trigger warning. Alright, let's go. I'm sweet 16, a rebel queen, and I look real hot in my tight blue jeans. Those are lyrics from one of my favorite songs, Dead End Justice by The Runaways, the first American rock band with only teenage girls. And in 2010, a film called The Runaways was released based off of the lives of lead singer Cherie Currie and Joan Jett, who played guitar for the band and wrote the lyrics. So I figured since the film was recently added to Netflix, I would explore some themes that were confronted by the band itself, like sexuality, gender expression, and sex itself. So let's get started. Now, I know it seems a little on the nose to discuss sex when it comes to a 70s rock band with songs all about sex, but what we have to remember going in is that these girls were doing things that no one expected women, let alone girls, to talk about, especially while playing the electric guitar. The film chronicles 15-year-old Cherie Currie as she was discovered in a club by Joan Jett and Kim Fowley. Remember that name. So let's take a closer look at one of the main characters of the film, because her experience and involvement is so vital when discussing the band and the film's sex, sexuality, and gender expression. One thing not only the film explores, but the band itself, was not simply sex, but sex through the eyes of a teenager, which was a defining characteristic of the success of the Runaways. In her memoir, Neon Angel, a memoir of a runaway, which the film was based on, Cherie Currie says that when her manager-to-be Kim Fowley learned that she was 15 years old, he said, "Sex sells, but teenage jailbait sex, it's provocative." And that was a term used frequently to describe Cherie and the band itself, jailbait. And the film confronts us as it depicts actual moments from Cherie's career with the Runaways, like when she bought a white corset and wore it during her performance of Cherry Bomb, which was a song written about her and her rebellion. In rock and roll, sex is an asset, it's a trait, and it's power. Sex is what drives the music to connect with the audience, and Kim Fowley repeatedly instructs the girls of this when he is teaching them how to have stage presence and, as he says in the film, sing with their cocks. And this was revolutionary for teenage girls, to be outwardly screaming about sex. And as Kim Fowley puts it best in the movie, this is not about women's lib, this is about women's libido. And though he had a point, these girls knew that what they were singing needed to be heard, as it gave a voice to girls. But nothing is ever as positive as it seems, and when someone is described as jailbait, it's like Chekhov's gun. Something is bound to go off. But before I detail all the bad that ensued, I want to discuss all the good the film does in depicting female sexuality. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Sandy West, the drummer of the band, is shown masturbating in a motel bathroom while Joan is outside the door instructing her. Sandy looks at pictures of men in the magazines and says she feels absolutely nothing, and it isn't until Joan Jett starts talking about Farrah Fawcett that Sandy begins to moan and eventually fall in the shower. Sandy West was a lesbian, and though Joan Jett has never officially come out, she does like women and is very blatant about it in her music. And this sexuality is explored openly and naturally in the film, as it depicts a woman discovering her sexuality and facing no repercussions because of it. Cherie herself also experimented with women, and Joan was one of those women, which the film implies in a subtle sex scene between the two of them. Now, the 70s were an important time for the gay community, especially when it came to music, and especially because big artists like David Bowie and Elton John were coming out. In her memoir, after she details her first sexual experience with a woman, Cherie says, "I thought of Bowie and Elton and Lou Reed, and if they could all come out, then I wanted to know what it was all about. Jesus, I was 15 years old. I wasn't a baby anymore. I wanted to experience this. I wanted to experience her." Once again, showing this importance of expressing sexuality as a young woman. But like I mentioned, this was a double-edged sword, as the sexuality of these women was used to exploit them. In her book, Currie says that Kim Fowley convinced her into spending a night with the male celebrity when she did not want to, and basically pawned her off to him as she learned that he told the man that she was on her period. He did not come to pick her up from the man's house until hours after he promised, and Currie was only 15, and she says she did it with him just to get it over with. In the film and in real life, Kim Fowley sent photographers to only Cherie's house to take provocative images of her. And when the band finds out about this later, Joan is furious, saying that they will only concentrate on these sexy images and not on their music. Though these girls were expressing an important revolt against the norms of what sexuality looked like, they were just that, girls. In fact, their other manager, Scott Anderson, who was 7 years older than Cherie, would eventually sleep with all members of the group, except one, Jackie Fox, who played bass. All of this reminds me of the character of Julia in George Orwell's 1984. In this book, a man named Winston slowly begins to revolt against his dystopian society, and one way he does this is by sleeping with Julia. Though Julia seems to also be in favor of rebellion, Winston comes to learn that she's really only interested in herself, not a widespread revolution. And thus, Winston tells her, "You're only a rebel from the waist down." And though in Julia's case this applies perfectly, I feel like the runaways were treated like Julia. Their sexuality was just dismissed as token rebellion and not something to respect. They were reduced to their bodies when they were fighting against that. This sexual exploitation is a tragic factor of the group, which is why I find it so important that the film establishes healthy sexual moments that these girls experience and experiment with. Along with experimenting with sexuality, the band also experimented with gender expression, which is also what garnered them attention as a group. And none other than the man, the myth himself, David Bowie, was a big part of that. Cherie Currie's obsession with David Bowie is heavily explored in the book, and the film takes the time to do the same. Bowie is pivotal in studying gender expression, as Bowie was the androgynous icon. As Corinne Siegel put it in her PBS piece on David Bowie, Bowie's style was at once theatrical, androgynous, and hypersexual, a revolutionary combination in a climate where gender was still understood as a strict binary. With Bowie as her idol, Cherie was compelled to express herself through outrageous glam rock looks, which is what Kim Fowley immediately noticed about her when he picked her in that club. In the film and in real life, she lip-syncs to a David Bowie song at a school talent show, proudly wearing his Aladdin Sane makeup. This was her showcasing and embracing herself as an outcast, and as Cherry Bomb puts it, a wild girl. In her novel, after making out with the woman and before she is going to sleep with her, Cherie recalls thinking, "I was the alien. A chameleon, androgynous, not like the others with their rigidly defined roles. I could change my sex as easily as I could change my hair." And she says this is probably how David Bowie feels when he kisses a woman. Androgyny itself contributed to this teenage rock mindset of discovery of self beyond the norm and rebellion, whether that meant finding labels that were the exact opposite of what your parents believed or rejecting them altogether. The film navigates this rejection of the norm perfectly in its introduction of Joan Jett, when she is at a leather jacket store and decides she wants to buy the same jacket the man next to her is wearing. This idea of gender expression outside the norm is what made the Runaways so appealing, as they proclaimed sexuality, but not in a hyper-feminine way, rather in a rock star way. But once again, this was twofold, as now the band faced criticisms of being lesbians. In her piece on Joan Jett's documentary, Trish Bendix says, "The only time Rolling Stone wrote about the Runaways was when the band was kicked out of Disneyland for lesbian behavior." Though these girls were acting out of their own ambitious rebellion, it's really interesting to see how brilliantly the film frames this rebellion as a response to male objectification and sexualization of them. At the beginning of the film, we see Cherie's twin sister Marie's 20-something-year-old boyfriend reach out and caress her hair, and she was just 15. After this, we get a scene of Joan showing her jacket to her friend, and then immediately when we cut back to Cherie's storyline, she has bleached and cut her hair David Bowie style, and is painting the Aladdin Sane makeup on her face. Though the film doesn't directly acknowledge this transformation as a response to the boyfriend's actions, chronologically the way it's edited frames it as Cherie's response of revolt and rebellion against the male gaze. This idea is only further reinforced in her memoir, when she goes on to share that this boyfriend would come to rape her, and a few weeks later is when she cuts her hair David Bowie style, and as she cuts it, she reflects on the rage and hatred she has for the world. She talks about how her transformation makes her not only feel as powerful as she did when she saw David Bowie live, but as powerful as David Bowie himself. Now, this isn't to say that women are only androgynous or dress in men's clothing out of spite. It is a conscious choice. a freeing choice that allows these women to feel comfortable in their own skin in a world telling them to settle for the uncomfortable. Cherie and Joan wear jumpsuits, red and silver ones, on stage that prompt them to feel power and command authority on that stage, when as young girls, they lacked authority in nearly every other facet of their rock star life. Now with that context, let's take another look at the song Dead End Justice and its lyrics. In my favorite part of the song, Joan and Cherie share a mic as they scream these lyrics. "This is like a movie, I know I'm gonna scream. All the pain that I feel makes me feel mean. It's so sad and crazy here, I think I'm gonna cry. If I don't wake up from this dream, I think I'm gonna. And they all scream, die. These girls sang lyrics for an entire generation of angry, horny, outcast teenagers. But they themselves were teenagers who were in need of much better than they got. They endured pain on the road as young girls, as Cherie details her rape that I mentioned, as well as her unplanned teen pregnancy done by the manager, Scott Anderson. Though I understand why the film omits quite a bit of this, as it would give the film a much darker tone and also would be a bigger dive into Cherie's life rather than Cherie and Joan, I like that the film doesn't shy away from the tragedy of this story, and rather present it subtly through its cinematography. As the film goes on, it becomes more and more devoid of warm and bright colors, slowly becoming more cool in tone. In an interview with Brian Gibson, writer and director of the film, Floria Sigismondi said, to depict the wear and tear of that one year and what it has done to the girls. The film, all being shot on Super 16 film, not only gives the film a 70s vibe like the director wanted, but also captures the grimy, even vicious atmosphere. Floria Sigismondi wanted the film to be a coming-of-age story rather than a biopic, and thus emphasize the age of these young women and how their age and how they were treated led to Cherie's breakdown. The Runaways is a film that portrays sexuality through the perspective of a young girl without avoiding the tragedy of how that sexuality was exploited and abused, and trying to heal that pain by portraying the fluidity of gender expression and sexuality. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and my take on the sexuality in The Runaways. I am almost done reading her memoir and it truly is very powerful. So if you have time, I would really recommend it, and I would recommend watching The Runaways on Netflix. So if you like this, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.